My name is Sarah Collins. I'm 38 years old. I'm still inside the moment it broke. I do not cry anymore. The pain settled deep and stayed there. Someone I trusted more than myself crossed a line and never looked back. I felt it before I accepted it. Something in my life was taken without noise. My money, my safety, my sense of who I was. I kept functioning while everything meaningful thinned out. I slept beside the person who caused it and said nothing. I learned how quiet loss can be. The proof did not shock me. It confirmed what my body already knew. Nothing here was a mistake. Nothing was accidental. I stopped asking questions out loud. I started listening instead. I let the silence protect me. I let time work. What I chose to do after that was careful, it was legal, and it was irreversible. Before everything shifted, I believed my life was steady. I woke up early. I planned my days. I paid bills on time. I kept promises. I trusted the person I shared my bed with. Trust felt normal. It did not feel brave or risky. It felt earned through years of routine and shared effort. I was not dramatic. I did not test loyalty. I believed consistency mattered more than words. I thought love showed itself through quiet things, shared meals, joint accounts, long plans. I felt proud of how we handled money. We talked about security. We talked about the future like it was already agreed upon. I trusted easily inside that space. I trusted the person closest to me with decisions that affected my life. I trusted that we were on the same side. I trusted that no one would move pieces without telling the other person. That trust shaped who I was. It made me calmer. It made me softer. It made me stop checking. I had friends, but my marriage held the center. I did not feel lonely. I felt partnered. I felt chosen. I felt included in decisions even when I was not present. I believed silence meant peace. I believed privacy meant respect. Looking back, I can see the edges where things thinned out. At the time, I ignored them. Small delays, vague answers, a shift in tone when money came up, nothing loud, nothing that forced a reaction, just moments where the room felt slightly colder. I noticed I was no longer asked certain questions. Decisions were already made. Paperwork moved without discussion. I told myself it was efficiency. I told myself I was busy. I told myself not to overthink. That word saved the comfort and buried the doubt. I remember a night when I asked a simple question and received an answer that did not match the facts. The answer was calm, confident. It did not invite follow-up. I felt a brief sting. Then I swallowed it. I trusted the tone more than my instincts. I kept living. I kept working. I kept believing stability was stronger than suspicion. I did not want conflict. I did not want to look small or insecure. I wanted to be the kind of person who trusted because she had no reason not to. There were signs that did not connect at first, statements that arrived later than usual, conversations that ended quickly, a locked drawer that had never been locked before. I noticed. I did nothing. I told myself there was an explanation I did not need to hear. I still believed we were building something together. I believed shared history protected us. I believed commitment meant transparency, even when it was uncomfortable. I did not think betrayal lived inside routine. I thought it needed chaos to survive. The first clear shift came quietly. I was organizing documents. Nothing unusual. I liked order. I liked knowing where things were. I liked control in small ways. It made life feel manageable. I opened a folder I had opened many times before. Something inside it did not belong. The paper felt heavier than it should have. The language felt distant, formal, precise. It was written to protect someone. It was not written for me. I read it once, then again. My body stayed still while my thoughts raced. The words did not accuse. They confirmed. They did not shout. They explained too much. I checked another document, then another. Dates lined up in a way that made sense only if something had been hidden. This was not an error. This was not confusion. This was structure. I felt heat rise in my chest, not anger. Recognition, the kind that removes doubt, the kind that does not ask questions anymore. I thought of every conversation that ended early, every decision made without me, every time I chose trust over curiosity. The pattern settled into place without effort. I did not cry. I did not shake. I sat down. I listened to the sound of my own breathing. I felt the loss arrive all at once. Not just money, not just security, the loss of shared reality, the loss of consent. This was not a mistake. This was intentional. This was planned. This was done by someone who knew exactly how much it would cost me. I realized something else in that moment. I had been excluded from my own life. Decisions had been made that changed my future without my knowledge. My trust had been used as cover. The room felt smaller. The silence felt loud. I could hear the clock. I could hear the refrigerator. Normal sounds continued while my understanding collapsed. I thought about confronting. I imagined the denial, the explanations, the careful language. I knew how that conversation would go. I had already heard parts of it before. I put the documents back where they were. I closed the drawer. My hands were steady. My face was calm. I knew then that reacting would give something away. That night, I lay beside the person who had done this. I watched the ceiling. I felt the distance even with our bodies close. I understood how easily trust could be weaponized. I did not sleep. I did not move. I planned nothing. I just absorbed the truth. The shock came later. It arrived when I realized how long this had been happening, how carefully it had been hidden, how alone I had been without knowing it. I stood in the kitchen the next morning holding my phone. A message notification lit the screen. It referenced something that should have included me. It did not. That was the moment everything stopped. After that moment, the days folded inward. I moved through them without shape. I woke up and completed tasks like a stranger inside my own body. My emotions arrived late and stayed longer than they should. I felt shame before anger. I felt guilt before grief. I kept asking myself how I missed what was happening in front of me. I replayed conversations and searched for places where I should have stopped trusting. I questioned my intelligence. I questioned my judgment. I questioned the version of myself that believed shared history meant shared loyalty. The damage did not announce itself all at once. It surfaced in small confirmations. An account balance that no longer matched my memory. A bill that should have been covered. A credit notification I did not recognize. I started checking everything. I told myself I was being cautious. I knew I was being afraid. The financial loss was real, but the deeper injury came from realizing my name had been used as protection. Documents carried my signature where I did not remember signing. My trust had become a tool. That was the first twist that settled into my bones. I was not just betrayed. I had been made complicit without consent. I felt dirty carrying that knowledge. I felt exposed in ways I could not explain to anyone else. I stopped talking to friends. I avoided questions. I kept my voice steady and my face neutral. I was protecting something I did not fully understand yet. As I kept looking, the second revelation arrived. The financial damage was not contained to one decision. It was layered, structured, spread out over time. Each choice designed to look reasonable on its own. Together they told a story of intent. Assets shifted quietly. Accounts moved to spaces I could not access. My future had been edited line by line. I felt foolish for believing security was mutual. I blamed myself for not insisting on transparency. I wondered if my calm nature had invited this. I wondered if my desire for peace had been mistaken for weakness. The loss of money hurt, but the loss of agency hurt more. I realized I had been living inside a version of marriage that existed only for me. That realization made it hard to breathe. The third twist came when I understood the reputational damage. My name appeared connected to actions I did not approve. I saw how easily a narrative could be shaped without my voice. I imagined conversations I was not part of, decisions justified by my assumed agreement. I felt my identity thinning. I was no longer sure how others saw me. I questioned whether I had already been positioned as careless or naive. That thought kept me awake. I felt trapped between exposure and silence. I did not know which would cost me more. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone older, someone quieter, someone carrying weight she did not choose. I began to doubt my memories. I wondered if I had been warned and ignored it. I wondered if this outcome was earned. That kind of thinking became constant. It wore me down. The fourth twist came quietly and changed everything. I discovered the betrayal had not started when I thought it did. It reached further back, into moments I remembered as safe, decisions I thought were shared. The realization rewrote my past. It made me question every milestone. I felt grief for a life that may not have existed the way I believed. I felt grief for the years I defended something that was already gone. Each new piece of information felt more personal than the last. It was not just about money or reputation anymore. It was about consent, about reality, about whether love had ever been mutual. I felt small but alert. The shock hardened into focus. I stopped blaming myself and started documenting. Quietly, carefully. I did not rush. I did not confront. I let the truth accumulate. Each detail brought clarity and weight. I felt the emotional fallout settle into my chest like a permanent presence, heavy but steady. I understood then that survival would require patience, that healing would not come from answers spoken out loud. I accepted that what I lost could not be recovered in the way I wanted. I also accepted that what was taken could still be accounted for. That knowledge did not bring comfort. It brought resolve. I learned how to stay still. That became my first discipline. I stopped reacting in real time. I stopped correcting small lies. I stopped asking questions that would force answers too soon. I watched instead. I listened to tone. I noticed timing. I noticed what was said and what was avoided. Emotional restraint was not natural for me at first. It felt like swallowing glass. Every instinct wanted release. Every thought wanted confrontation. I chose silence because it gave me access. Silence let people relax. Silence made patterns visible. I became careful with my face and my voice. I practiced calm. I practiced neutral responses. Inside, I was recording everything. I wrote nothing down at first. I let the shape of it form in my mind. I needed to be sure I was not imagining intent. I needed to know the difference between betrayal and chaos. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to punish confusion. I wanted truth. I kept living my life outwardly unchanged. I went to work. I answered messages. I shared meals. I learned how to sit across from someone who had taken from me and not reveal that I knew. That was harder than anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger would have given me permission to destroy. I did not want to become that person. I wanted to remain recognizable to myself. I struggled with the moral weight of what I was considering. I asked myself if planning anything made me dishonest. I questioned whether patience was just another form of denial. Some nights I lay awake thinking that walking away would be simpler. Walking away would preserve my image of myself as fair. Then I remembered the cost of walking away without truth. I remembered the documents. I remembered how my name had been used. That memory steadied me. I began to gather information deliberately. not secretly in the way that feels desperate, but methodically in the way that feels adult. I requested copies of records I had every right to access. I asked routine questions framed as logistics. I updated my understanding of shared obligations. Each step was legal. Each step was quiet. I felt fear each time I clicked send on an email. I felt fear when envelopes arrived. I managed it by slowing down. I reminded myself that I was not acting out of rage, I was acting out of responsibility. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want revenge to consume me. I wanted it to restore balance. I watched how easily the person closest to me assumed my ignorance. That assumption became leverage. I noticed how comfort bred carelessness. Small slips appeared, overconfidence softened boundaries. I let that happen. I did not interrupt. I did not correct. I let the story continue until it told itself fully. There were moments when guilt hit me unexpectedly. I felt like a spy in my own life. I wondered if restraint made me cold. I worried about losing my capacity for empathy. I checked myself often. I asked whether my actions aligned with who I wanted to be after this ended. Choosing truth over anger meant accepting discomfort. It meant delaying satisfaction. It meant sitting with ambiguity while clarity assembled slowly. There were days when I was almost confronted, days when the weight pressed too hard. On those days, I revisited the facts. I reread what I knew. Facts grounded me when emotion threatened to distort the plan. I began to see the outline of consequences forming naturally. Systems correct themselves when light reaches them. That idea became my anchor. I did not need to invent harm. I needed to stop shielding it. I began separating my future quietly, updating access, reclaiming agency where I could without announcement. Each action was small and justified. Together, they shifted power. I felt my fear lessen as my understanding grew. I felt anger soften into resolve. The moral conflict did not disappear. It matured. I accepted that accountability would cause pain. I accepted that choosing truth would end what remained of the relationship as I knew it. I mourned that privately. I did not rush the grief. I let it exist alongside planning. They were not opposites. They were parallel processes. I imagined the moment everything would surface. I imagined the calm that would follow. That vision kept me patient. I refused shortcuts. I refused anything that would compromise legality or integrity. I refused to lie even when lying would have sped things up. That choice slowed the process but strengthened it. I noticed how my silence changed the dynamic. I was no longer reacting, I was directing, not overtly, subtly. Timing shifted, decisions stalled where they once rushed. I felt inevitability settle in, not as threat, but as gravity. The truth was moving toward daylight on its own schedule. I was simply making sure nothing blocked it. I became comfortable with waiting. Waiting stopped feeling like weakness. It felt like precision. I understood then that revenge did not need noise. It needed accuracy. I chose patience again and again. I chose the truth every time anger asked to lead. The final act did not arrive with a shout. It arrived quietly, like the last note of a song fading into silence. I watched as the structures that had been carefully hidden began to unravel, not because I forced them to, but because the truth had found the light I had allowed it to reach. Months of observation, careful documentation, and patient maneuvering culminated in the clarity I had longed for. Each piece of evidence I had gathered, every discrepancy I had noted, every small pattern I had waited to confirm, formed a coherent whole. What had once been scattered, hidden, and abstract now became undeniable. I delivered the final documents with a sense of neutrality that was almost unnatural. No tremor in my hands, no hesitation in my voice. I let the facts speak. They could not be argued away. They could not be ignored. Legal counsel reviewed each page, verified every date, and confirmed what I already knew. Nothing was missing. Nothing was fabricated. The betrayal that had once seemed endless now had boundaries. It could be named. It could be measured. It could be held accountable. The consequences were immediate but not explosive. They were methodical. Bank accounts shifted, ownerships were corrected, records were amended to reflect reality. Every action that had been taken under false assumptions was reversed where the law allowed. What could not be reversed was exposed. Contracts that had been manipulated were nullified. Documents that had been misused were invalidated. The damage to my name, my reputation, and my finances was acknowledged and addressed. Publicly, where necessary. Privately, where possible. Every legal structure that had been used to shield deceit became a mirror, reflecting the truth back at the person who had orchestrated the betrayal. I did not watch them crumble with satisfaction. I watched with a quiet recognition that justice, when patient and precise, does not need rage to be effective. I saw the same face I had once loved become careful, measured, uncertain. That control they had wielded so easily was gone. They moved cautiously now, aware that their previous assumptions of safety no longer applied. I understood the power shift had happened without spectacle, without melodrama, without vengeance that would have left me hollow. Their life had changed. Their choices had consequences they could not undo. The most difficult moments were not when the legal mechanisms worked. They were the moments of internal reckoning when I had to confront what I had become through patience and silence. I was no longer the same person I had been before the betrayal. That self, trusting and unquestioning, no longer existed, but the self that remained was steady, resilient, and clear. I understood that power, when rooted in truth rather than impulse, could be a form of justice that neither degraded nor corrupted the one who wielded it. I accepted the subtle weight of that knowledge, knowing it came at the cost of innocence but spared me bitterness. I watched as their network of friends, colleagues and associates slowly adjusted to the reality I had exposed. Whispers of confusion turned into quiet acknowledgement. People who had been misled by charm and routine began to distance themselves. They questioned decisions, accounts, and actions they had never scrutinized before. The isolation that had been invisible in the background of deception now became visible. The betrayals that had once seemed untouchable were catalogued in public records, confirmed by the same systems the betrayer had thought protected them. Reputation, once a shield, became a reflection of truth. There were no dramatic confrontations, no yelling matches, no public humiliation beyond what justice required. Every step was deliberate, every consequence legal, every exposure precise. The person who had taken so much from me now existed in a reality they could no longer manipulate. Each small correction, each document, each accounting was a reminder of inevitability. I felt no triumph in a way that others might expect. Triumph would have required celebration. This was calm, calculated, and final. It required patience, not spectacle. I took time to observe the shifts, watching their careful steps, their hesitant communications. Their forced transparency was its own quiet satisfaction. Every slip they made, every assumption they had previously counted on, now revealed itself to the world. Every structure built on deceit had cracks, and those cracks widened steadily. I felt no joy in their discomfort. I felt recognition that actions have consequences, that truth, when allowed to move unhindered, restores balance in a way that anger cannot replicate. I also took time for myself. I returned to small routines that reminded me who I was before this all began. I walked through familiar streets, visited places that had once felt ordinary, and allowed silence to fill the spaces that had been heavy with suspicion. The world felt different, not because it had changed, but because I had. I was more aware, more careful, more deliberate. I understood my boundaries more clearly. I understood that the patience I had cultivated was a shield as much as it was a tool. I carried no bitterness toward the past, only clarity. The final revelation came quietly, one morning when I reviewed the last of the corrected documents. Every misused signature had been restored, every hidden account had been documented, every legal action required to protect my name had been completed. What remained was simply the reality of who I had been dealing with. I understood fully the reach of the betrayal, how carefully it had been concealed, how extensively it had touched my life. I also understood fully how much control I now had over its exposure and its consequences. The power was not in retaliation. The power was in truth. In the days that followed, I saw the long-term effects ripple. Opportunities that had once been manipulated away from me were reclaimed. I could see reputational credibility returning. Confidence, once fragile, grew in small increments. The person who had betrayed me existed in a state of constant calculation. Every step they took had to be measured. I watched that carefully, not to gloat, but to confirm that justice, when executed with patience and clarity, is undeniable. I thought often about anger and revenge. I thought about how easy it would have been to act impulsively, to lash out, to take satisfaction in immediate chaos. But I understood that such impulses would have been temporary, leaving emptiness behind. The satisfaction I felt now was calm, deep, and unshakable. It was not noise. It was presence. It was a full acknowledgement of the truth and the consequences it carried. The betrayals could not be undone, but they could be accounted for. The person who caused them could not escape accountability. Even as the weeks stretched into months, I maintained the same quiet vigilance. I allowed myself small moments of relief but not indulgence. I reminded myself that the past, no matter how carefully exposed, does not vanish. I reminded myself that trust must be rebuilt cautiously. I reminded myself that the power of truth is not in spectacle, but in precision. Every interaction, every decision, every movement became intentional, rooted in awareness. I was no longer naive, no longer unquestioning, no longer passive. That was both the cost and the reward. The final emotional weight settled on me in a way that was heavy, measured, and complete. I did not feel light. I did not feel triumphant. I felt whole. I understood fully the scope of what had happened, the consequences it carried, and the person I had become through deliberate observation, patience, and truth. I had restored balance without chaos. I had reclaimed my life without spectacle. I had exposed deception without lowering myself to it. I had allowed justice to move with the inevitability of the facts I had uncovered. There were moments when I could almost hear the past whisper, tempting me with imagined grievances, with imagined losses that still lingered. I let those moments pass without engagement. They were shadows that could not affect the reality I had constructed. I had no desire to relive betrayal or to punish beyond what was deserved. Every action I had taken had been precise. Every consequence had been measured. Every legal and social mechanism I had used now served only truth. I felt the inevitability of accountability settle into the world around me like a quiet tide. The day I finally closed the last folder, I did not announce it. I did not celebrate. I did not need to. I looked around at the space I had reclaimed. I looked at my hands and remembered the patience it had taken. I remembered the weight of restraint, the moral conflicts, the hesitation, the slow gathering of evidence. I remembered nights spent alone, wrestling with self-doubt, guilt, and the quiet fear of uncertainty. All of it had led to this point, where truth existed fully, consequences were irreversible, and the betrayals could no longer hide behind routine or charm. I left the office that day without looking back. I did not need to. I had observed, recorded, and acted with precision. I had waited for the truth to emerge. I had chosen legality over vengeance, patience over impulse, and clarity over anger. I understood that the person who had betrayed me would live with the knowledge of their exposure every day. Their freedom was limited not by spectacle but by reality. Their control had evaporated quietly. Their assumptions of safety were gone. I had not taken pleasure in destruction, but I had restored balance in a way that was permanent. As I walked home, I noticed the small details that had once gone unnoticed. The light on the street corner, the way leaves moved in the wind, the calmness in my own breathing. For the first time in a long time, I felt present in the life I had fought to reclaim. I was aware of every step, every choice, every word I had allowed to exist in truth. I knew the weight of my actions and the responsibility I carried, but I also knew the power of measured patience and relentless attention. I knew the world now reflected what had been hidden. I did not return to the person who had betrayed me. There was no need. The truth had returned what I was owed. Justice had moved in silence, with precision, and without spectacle. I felt no triumph in revenge, no gloating in exposure, only the calm satisfaction of alignment. Every legal correction, every social adjustment, every financial reclamation had been completed. The person who had caused so much damage lived now in a world where consequences were tangible and permanent. I did not watch for misery, I only watched for balance, and it had been restored. That evening, I sat quietly in my apartment, letting the finality of it settle over me. I did not speak aloud. I did not need to. I had watched, waited, and acted. I had allowed truth to move inexorably toward accountability. I had reclaimed my name, my finances, and my peace without resorting to chaos. The weight of it was heavy, but it was not cruel. I could feel the absence of betrayal in every corner of my life. I could feel the absence of doubt in my mind. I could feel the return of agency in my body. I could feel the quiet power of patience rewarded. And in that silence I understood it completely. The betrayal had been real. The loss had been real. The manipulation had been intricate, deliberate, and sustained. But the truth had been stronger. Every carefully hidden action had been exposed, every deceptive step had been accounted for, every legal and social mechanism that had been misused had been corrected, every assumption of immunity had been shattered. And the person who had betrayed me could not undo it, could not reclaim what had been taken, could not return to the world of false security they had created. I felt the final line of this chapter settle in me. It was quiet, calm, and irreversible. It carried no noise, no dramatics, no celebration. It carried only truth. And in that truth, I found my own unshakable conclusion. I leaned back in my chair, let my hands rest in my lap, and whispered to no one, but meant it fully. Everything they built on betrayal ended the moment I chose patience, truth, and silence. And it ended with me.